All right, guys. This next guest is a man of many talents. I'm talking producer, rapper, DJ, studio engineer, and label owner. He's worked with Royce the 5'9", Sadat X, Tony Touch, Master Ace, Psycho Les, El the Sensei, MOP, The Beat Miners, Smith & Wesson, Black Moon, just to name a few. Okay, that's just to name a few. I'm talking about the one and only Jake Palumbo.
Jake Palumbo, man, what up? Glad to be here, yo. Thank you for having me.
How you doing today, bro?
I'm good, bro. I just left the studio, just wrapped it up for the weekend, and I'm here rocking with Panda Chop.
I appreciate you, man. So I just want to thank you for your time today. So let's start at the beginning. Where are you originally from?
I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. I lived around, for the first half of my life, I lived around East Tennessee. I was born in Knoxville. I lived in Morristown, Tennessee for a little while. I lived in Johnson City, Tennessee for a little while. And before spending the second half of my life up to this point in Brooklyn, New York. But, we'll obviously get to that later. But I was born in East Tennessee. Not exactly, the first place you would think of as like a hip hop hotbed or anything like that. But, that's the power of hip hop.
Right.
It was able to find me down there. But
did you grow up with any siblings?
That's why, what's that?
I said, did you grow up with any siblings?
I'm the oldest of three, yeah.
Oh, okay. And what did your parents do for work?
My father was a mechanical engineer for Philips Electronics. Philips Electronics, they made TVs and, all kinds of consumer electronics for many years. They had a big station in Knoxville, Tennessee, and my pops worked for them. He, mainly just designed and executed models of components, things, little different parts that went in televisions and things like that. He did actually work on one of the first ever TV screens that was in an airplane. They commissioned Philips in Knoxville to do that. So now one of the reasons, a quick side note, one of the reasons that I got so bitterly pushed towards a life of entrepreneurialism is my father's smarts and his technical ability and, how good he was with numbers and micrometers and things like that. That helped Philips make millions of dollars. And my father out of that got a coffee mug, it was like a coffee mug with the Philips logo and, the little picture of the TV on the airline. So, even as a child, I was like, yo, my pops,
was this given thank you for working for X amount of years or
Well, no, just in terms of he really helped them with a big project that, it put television screens in airplanes for the first time. And aside from his regular salary that he got going to work, all he got out of that was a coffee mug. And so, I remember as a kid being really, angered and driven by that, and I guess that kind of later on pushed me towards a life of wanting to work for myself and whatnot. But yeah, my father worked for Philips Electronics. My mother was a homemaker. She took care of home and, looked after three lunatic children. And, they kept a lot of music in the house. My parents had a very big vinyl collection that was real eclectic. My father was into a lot of prog rock, Rush and Yes and King Crimson and Pink Floyd and that kind of stuff. My mother was all over the place. She would listen to Black Sabbath one day. She would listen to Cat Stevens another day. But as a small child, as a baby, I was fascinated with the record collection. And when I was a kid, I used to actually I would get a record off the shelf and start chewing on the vinyl. I've joked that that led to me having the vinyl addiction that I later developed in life as some kind of chemical reaction or whatnot. But there was always a lot of music in my house. So from the earliest of age, I I was entrenched in their record collection, and, anytime there was music on TV, I didn't care what genre it was or whatever, I'd be parked in front of the TV just trying to study the musicians and just, see what they were doing and what makes it tick. So.
Right, because you described yourself like as almost having like obsessive personality, right? Since a kid that
Very
drove
much
you
so.
to basically study like everything about anything you were interested in.
Yes, like that's the cornerstone of my personality, is that like if I get into something, I cannot rest until I know every micro working detail of how it operates and things like that. So, whether it's music, whether it's pro wrestling, pornography, whatever it is, like I always like to know the inner workings of things I'm passionate about. But yeah, but to your point, I have an obsessive personality, and, growing up in Tennessee, like I was born in the 80s, I was a kid in the 90s, before the internet and stuff like that, and living where I lived, like there was not a lot to do. So if you didn't have like a passion or something to keep yourself occupied with, you're going to find ways to get into trouble very quickly. So my parents were always real cool about, they never gave me a hard time about like the noise I was making with my music, because they knew where I was at. Like I was in the bedroom, I started playing instruments when I was a kid, and, when I was in school, I had little garage bands with different people and things like that. And they never gave me a hard time about like, the noise I was making with my music. Like they encouraged it, because they're like, the things this kid could be out doing, because I was a bit of a maniac terror anyway. So instead of, my mother was encouraged to put me on like Ritalin and, drugs to, quell my hyperactivity. And instead of doing that,
wait. So
mom,
were you diagnosed with like ADHD at a young age?
in Tennessee in the 80s, they didn't have those kind of diagnoses yet. Like,
Right.
I wasn't even delivered by an OBGYN. Like of the three kids, like my brother was the only one that was delivered by a proper OBGYN, because Tennessee didn't get one until like 88. So I'm saying that to say that like there was no awareness of ADHD, hyperactivity, anxiety, like all the things that like we aware of today. Like there really was none of that. Like Tennessee, I always say, was kind of like 10 years behind the rest of the world at that point. When the internet came out, like that changed things, because everybody's getting the same feed of information at the same time. But nah, like I was never formally diagnosed. I just was I was a maniac. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. and just tap my mom on the shoulder and ask her how hydrogen works or something like that. Like my brain was just constantly always going. So instead of putting me on medication or putting me in some kind of disciplinary program or something like that, she fed me creativity. It was like, make your music, write your lyrics, I was always encouraged to do something creative and given total freedom in that department. So.
That's amazing, man, because, a lot of people confuse that kind of behavior with you being like, with the child being, I don't know, rambunctious, or like, you know what I mean? Like that they need to be disciplined or something along those lines. But she fed into your creativity, allowed you a productive way to channel that type of thing.
1,000%. Like I wouldn't be talking to you today, like if my parents hadn't given me that environment. Like I firmly believe I would have probably, fallen into the traps of living in Tennessee. But no disrespect, I love my home state very dearly, but we have a love-hate relationship sometimes. But anyway, recognizing that like she took it as a challenge, basically, that, I need to give this kid something to challenge his brain and occupy it instead of trying to suppress it. So very grateful for that part. Like we didn't have a lot in the way of money, and, I didn't own a pair of Nikes until I was 21, but like I got to do a lot of cool things as a kid because, my parents gave me such an open space to be myself.
So you were saying that you were born in the 80s, right? And you're coming up in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Help explain, like paint the picture for people. Like you're walking down the street in Tennessee. Like, what do you see? Are we talking like dusty roads? Are we talking, paint the scene?
No, not like that. Like it was, Knoxville is a city of about 250, 300,000 people. Johnson City is about 100,000 people. It's a college town. Both of those cities have major, universities there. It was not the sticks by any means. Like, it just wasn't New York. It wasn't LA. It wasn't Chicago. It wasn't anything that you had in a major city. It's, heavy. There was a heavy culture of, football and NASCAR and country music and, Stars and Stripes and, just a lot of things that like, even as a kid, I didn't really connect with necessarily. But there's a lot of great things about Tennessee too. It's some of the best food you'll ever have in your life. The people are very kind, will give you the shirt off their back. Beautiful land, clean air. Like, there's a lot, but infrastructurally, it has a lot of problems. I always say I feel a lot safer.
So it's kind of like that all-American kind of thing, right?
In some
like
ways,
that,
yeah.
That kind of culture of like that all-American.
Through an Appalachian filter, though, because Appalachia is kind of like the part of the South that gets forgotten about a lot. But yeah, there was a lot of that. So that's what I mean when I say that, it's not like I stepped outside and, people were breakdancing and graffiti and things like that. Like I had to, hip hop found me, but I also had to seek it out myself. I always make this distinction too. Like this sounds crazy when I say it, but East Tennessee, the Knoxville, Johnson City area, Nashville and Memphis got hip to things much earlier because you had movements like 3-6 Mafia and, 8 Ball and MJG and things that were making noise as far back as the early 90s. But in East Tennessee on the Appalachian side, we did not get a hip hop radio station until the year 2000.
Wow.
When one of the local stations changed their format and became Jammin' 92.3 hip hop and R&B. So there was no hip hop radio to hear these great records. And I always make the distinction too, like my family didn't get cable television until, I was 14 or 15. So the only time I would get, when I would go over to my grandmother's house, she had cable. And because I was so obsessed with just music, period, I would always ask her to put the television on MTV. Inevitably, I end up watching some episodes of Yo MTV Raps, and I start seeing some stuff that really piques my interest. Now, I would mow my grandma's lawn once a week and get $20. And I would always take that $20 to Camelot Music. It was a record store in the local mall. And I would just buy somebody's album. It could be anything. But I walked in. The year was 1994. I'm about 12. And I see Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back on the shelf. And there was something about that album cover that just mesmerized me. And I ended up buying that album out of curiosity more than anything. I had some awareness of Public Enemy because I knew they had done a song with Anthrax. But I mainly just bought this tape out of curiosity. I took It Takes a Nation of Millions home and played that cassette so many times that the tape actually snapped. I still have it. I told Hank Shockley this story when I met him, but yeah, I played that PE tape so many times that it snapped. And then that sparks, buying more hip hop albums. For my birthday in 1997, my parents asked me what I wanted for my birthday that year, and I told them I would like Wu-Tang Forever double CD because it was either getting ready to come out or just came out. I can't remember what month that dropped, but
Not a
My
bad
parents
gift.
got me Wu-Tang Forever. And that basically overnight solidified like my need to be in hip hop. Like that album was a life-changing moment for me. Especially when I put two and two together that RZA was the guy that was doing the beats. And once I began to understand the concept of a hip hop producer as a one-man band who has a drum machine and a sampler and instruments and whatnot, the idea just became mesmerizing to me. And then a girl I knew worked at a bookstore, and she had given me this Vibe encyclopedia of hip hop. It was a book they published in probably around 2000. It was a big book. It was literally an encyclopedia of hip hop, and they were throwing it out at the bookstore or something like that. And she ended up bringing it to me, and I studied that thing like it was the Bible. And from there, there's a lot more from there, but yeah, it was one of those things that like hip hop found me down there in the middle of nowhere kind of, but at the same time, like it was my own curiosity. Like I went very hard to, especially when I was young, a teenager and a young man, like I went very hard to seek it out also.
Got you, man. What age did you start playing instruments?
Very young, like 6 years old, probably. I started, my father was a pretty, my father was a competent musician. My younger brother is a virtuoso guitar player. Like he plays in a metal band and, can do all the shredding. He's played guitar on a lot of different things I've produced over the years, but, so there is some like musical ability that comes in the family. But yeah, when I was about maybe 6, we had guitars around the house. I started playing those. My grandma had a piano. I started kind of teaching myself how to play that. My parents got me a set of drums. I was maybe 11 or 12. That was the other thing. They tolerated me playing the drums like in this tiny little rental house. That's what I mean. Like their willingness to sit and listen to me banging on the drums when they probably had a long day at work and, don't want to hear this shit. So yeah, I started playing the drums around that time, and I was in the school orchestra. I did classical percussion. I was kicked out of the school orchestra in the 8th grade for being a disciplinary problem, but I was there long enough to learn basic music theory and, things that did help me later. My running joke, I'm not great at any one of these instruments. I was a good drummer at one point. I just haven't owned a drum set for a few years. But my running joke is I play 6 instruments.
Kind of hard to have that in New York.
Yeah, I was about to say, where are you going to practice the drums in New York? But yeah, no, my running joke is I play 6 instruments poorly. Because I'm not great at any of them, but I know how to make them all work functionally. And with the magic of things like Pro Tools, if I can play something correctly for 4 bars, I can copy and paste it. And, it doesn't matter. I'm not a virtuoso musician. But yeah, playing instruments came early. Yeah.
So what age did you start making beats and rapping?
Making beats came first. It wasn't long after I got that Wu-Tang album. That's 97, 98. I'm a teenager. I'm 16. So I remember there was a music store that I bought a Boss Dr. Rhythm DR. I think it was a DR 550 drum machine.
How much was that?
Yeah, I got the DR 550 first and then the Dr. Groove 202. And so with those 2 little cheap drum machines and a little Yamaha keyboard and, with the record collection I had started to build, I started collecting vinyl, again, as a teenager, just out of love of music. And then once my ear gets hip to the notion that, I need to be on the hunt for records to sample, then I really started buying records. So yeah, as a teenager, I started making beats. And by the time I had done that for a little while, and again, going back to where I was at geographically, I just didn't know other kids that rapped and made beats and DJ'd and, you know, things of that nature. So when I was 18, I moved to Johnson City, Tennessee, and got my own place. And it was around that time that I did start meeting other people who rhymed. And so after a certain amount of time, like of producing tracks, and, you know, with me just being a person who my brain goes 100 miles an hour and I have a lot to say and I'm very opinionated about a lot of things. And I have weird inside jokes that I only care about them being funny to me. You know, it becomes inevitable. You start kicking bad freestyles over your beats. And then, you know, eventually start taking, you know, writing rhymes seriously. And I will say, like, I think I got nice at the beats quicker than I got nice on the mic. Like, finding my voice as an MC was a little bit longer journey. I think the beat thing came together quicker because I did have that musical foundation of just like a lifetime of kind of knowing what, because at the end of the day, like, it's all music. Like, music theory applies to hip hop the same way that it applies to jazz or rock music or anything else. Like, you have song structure, you have key, you have tonality, you have things like that. So yeah, it was beats first, but it didn't take long before I eventually started rhyming.
When did you learn to DJ?
I don't know that I ever have learned to DJ. No, you know, I always say you know how they have studio gangsters? I'm a studio DJ.
Gotcha.
You know, I do a lot of my own, like, scratch hooks and stuff. And, you know, when I can punch in if I made a mistake or, you know, something like that, I can sound pretty nice. If I got to replicate that same thing live, I'm not as good. But early on, I got turntables. I bought this crappy. It was a set of Newmark. Guitar Center had this box. It was the Funkmaster Flex TT 205s or something like that. But for $199, which was all I could afford at the time, you got 2 belt drive Newmark turntables and a Newmark mixer, which that mixer actually still works. I gave it to Jay Zone recently because his mixer kicked the bucket. But anyway, I bought this really cheap set of belt drive turntables. And at that time, I didn't know that cutting and scratching on a direct drive turntable, like a Technics 1200 or, you know, any turntable where the platter is mounted directly on the motor, it's 10 times easier to cut on one of those than on a belt drive turntable. But I didn't know this at the time. I thought I was just really whack at DJing. So anyway, that came early, but I never necessarily aspired to get great at DJing. It was just a skill that I wanted to have in the event of I wanted to be able to do scratch hooks on my own songs. Because again, now it's different now. Like, I know a lot of dope DJs, and it's a little more common today. If I need cuts on a song, I'll just reach out to one of my DJ homies and get them to scratch on it. But I wanted to be able to DJ to be able to do my own scratch hooks, and also from a show standpoint, because, you know, when you're doing DIY touring, you know, which is very not glamorous a lot of times, like, you know, people may be wearing multiple hats and juggling different jobs. One person on the tour may also be working the merch table, and then one person may have to DJ for this other act. And, you know, I wanted, from a show capacity, I wanted to be able to at least competently, like, if I had to DJ for somebody, I could do it.
Right.
But I just, I don't think it was where my strengths lied. It was just a skill I wanted to have in the toolbox.
So at this time, you said around 18, you moved to Johnson City, Tennessee, right? And you know how to make beats. You know, you're starting to write rhymes at this time?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So are you recording?
I worked at...
Are you recording your own songs and stuff at this point? Like, you're using the computer to, like, lay down some tracks? Okay.
So what I did was, it was really funny. God bless the dead, my man Mike Marshall. I was saving up my money at the time to try to buy an ADAT machine, which at the time, you know, an ADAT would only record 8 tracks. So if you needed 16 tracks, that means you needed 2 ADAT machines, and so on and so forth. Now, one ADAT machine was like $2,000 at the time, which might as well have been $1 million. I was working at Sears in the warehouse, not bringing home much money. So what ended up happening was my man, Mike Marshall, I was telling him about how I was saving up to buy an ADAT, and he goes, well, I just found this thing called Cool Edit Pro. Let me show it to you.
Oh,
and he
my
showed
God.
me this very crude, I mean, if some of y'all, if you remember it, Cool Edit Pro actually later became Adobe Audition. Adobe bought it and rebranded it.
Oh, are you serious? I always wondered what happened. What happened to Cool Edit Pro. You know what I mean? Because I remember that app too. That's so crazy that you brought that up. I've never heard anybody else talk about Cool Edit. Right? Like I remember oh my God, man, that's crazy. Wow.
It was very primitive. It didn't have any MIDI. There was no setting the beats per minute. Like it was just a recording program. So I would have to make my beat and then just record it manually into the computer. But anyway, Mike Marshall saved me a lot of time and headache because 2-3 years later, the ADAT was obsolete by that point and everybody was on computers. So what happened was he shows me Cool Edit Pro and he's like, yo, if you can get a computer, I'll hook you up with this. So I went back on Monday to my job at Sears and I stole a computer, a compact Presario with a Pentium 3 processor. I lifted that thing right into my Jeep when I was making a garbage run. And I took it and I got hooked up. So to your point, yes, like early on, I had set up like kind of a mini bedroom studio in my bedroom in Johnson City. And that's where the Space Lab was born. So I was just making my early whack demos and, you know, trying to make it. I did eventually meet some other people there that, you know, made music too. And we formed a crew. And it was at that point, a couple kind of things happened. Well, one thing I will say too, real quick, is that like this was a very bizarre time to get into the music business. Now, you know, I'm young, I'm barely out of high school, but in that early 2000s, you got to remember we're in this little window where Napster and downloading and Pirate Bay has completely decimated, music consumption. No one's buying music at this point. Nobody's getting record deals anymore. I've missed that window to where like, you know, it was much easier to get a deal and whatnot. But we're not quite to the social media streaming era yet. Like we don't have these same tools that we have now. Like, you know, today you could be in, you could be in rural Oklahoma, and if you know how to work the internet, like you can, you know, get your music out there and build a fan base. But at this time, like, you know, we were still trying, you know, in this era, like you're still having to press up CDs and pass out flyers and, you know, like do the hand-to-hand thing. It's just with no money. So I started in this business in a very bizarre time. So, and I think it was that too that influenced my decision. Let me not get ahead of myself. So I start in this bizarre time of like, okay, I'm going to start pressing. I'm going to make Space Lab recordings and independent imprint. I'm going to press up my first 1,000 CDs. This all happened around the same time that I had a major life event. My father committed suicide. And at that time, you know, my world was kind of spun in a lot of ways, and I really hated working at Sears, and I felt stuck, and I just, you know, I wanted to do something drastic. So I quit my job at Sears and took the money that I got and from my little severance or whatnot. I pressed up my first thousand.
Wait. I thought you were told that the job was like ending or something like that.
Oh, no. That comes later in New York.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
That comes later when I get to New York. So we're still in Tennessee right now. But anyway, I quit my job and pressed up my first 1,000 CDs and decided that I was just going to do music and I was going to sell CDs and, figure out a way I wasn't working for anybody anymore. Now, if you can imagine in 2005, Tennessee, quitting your job to do underground rap is probably a pretty easy way to starve to death. It did not go well. Like, we were doing shows and we were, doing everything you could possibly do on a local level, but it just, it was very limited in what I was able to do with it. So I spent maybe about 1.5 years doing that. We pressed up several different releases and did a ton of self-booked shows around the Southeast and, tried to do everything I could, because at that time you would read these books. Like, I used to, on my lunch break at Sears, I would go to, there was a Books A Million across the street. And I would go across the street on my lunch break and I would read all the books that they had about the music business. And I would read Wendy Day's column. She used to write this column in Murder Dog magazine about, breaking down the business and things like that. So I would always go, and these books you would read at the time would always tell you, well, you need to blow up and establish yourself in your region first before you go nationwide.
Right.
But I just don't think that applied to Johnson City, Tennessee at that point. So what ends up happening is a girl that I had known and dated in the past in Tennessee gets a job in Brooklyn teaching high school in East New York. And so she lives in Brooklyn now. And so I start doing the thing because I'm realizing that, like, trying to pursue hip hop in East Tennessee in a pre-social media world is not working. And I'm the type of person that, like,
Jake, before we go into that though, right? Before we go into that, at that time, sure, you're uploading music to like MySpace and everything, because you know how they used to have like the artist profiles and everything where you could play your songs on there?
Yeah, so I had built a .com in 2003. There was spacelabrecordings.com was around in 2003. It was a primitive, like, website compared to what can be done today. But I was working that pretty early. MySpace came around right around the time I left Tennessee and moved to New York. So I didn't quite get to utilize that until I was already a New Yorker. But yeah, like, I was uploading to, there used to be a thing called the Internet Underground Music Archive that was like an early community. There was SoundClick. There was, I was uploading in whatever early, mp3.com, stuff like that. I tried to adopt the internet from the very get-go. But it was down there. It was just a lot of hand-to-hand thing, like going to clubs, passing out flyers, passing out CDs, going to, different cities and trying to pull up to the radio station and talk to the program director, finding out where all the Sunday night unsigned radio shows were. And, I wasted a lot of time mailing press kits that never got opened and, things like that. But yeah, that's what we were basically doing with whatever limited resources. But I could just kind of realize it was not going to be fruitful at that point. And so, this chick ends up getting a job teaching high school in Brooklyn. And so now I have a place to stay if I want to come to New York. And I'd made a couple trips to New York prior to that. Just me and my friends, made trips up to see what it was. And so I start making trips frequently, like once, I didn't have a job. So, once every month or so, I would make a trip to New York. I would, go to Fat Beats. I would go to New Eurekan Poetry Cafe to rap at whatever, that open mic or whatever open mic I could find, and just try to do the unsigned rapper thing. Now, eventually, I completely and totally run out of money in Tennessee. And I've just got to make a drastic change. And so I decided that I was going to make a run for it, because at this point, again, we're still not quite at the dawn of social media. That's taking off and booming right as I get to New York. So I just I'm the type of person that I benefit from being thrown into the deep end of the pool and like having to swim so I don't drown. And with about $75 to my name in 2006, I moved to New York. So my friend let me stay on her couch for a few months until it took me about a month or so to find a job in an apartment. And then, I locked into, and this is where I guess the present second part of my story begins.
Gotcha. Okay. But 2003, at the end of 2003, you put out the first CD, right? Future Dead Rapper?
Future Dead Rapper, yeah. Although I say 2003, but that's only because the CDs came back from UPS on December 22nd. It was the release party was technically 2004, but yeah, 20 years ago, my debut project, which is not on streaming at the moment, that's actually my only project that's not on streaming. That was the first project I put out as an MC. And, I produce all my solo albums anyway. But that was the first thing we pressed up. I pressed 1,000 CDs of them. I was able to sell most of them. I still have maybe 100 or so in a box. And it's kind of cool because being that album's not on streaming, at shows, I put some CD copies out on the merch table in case anybody wants one. And it's kind of cool because it's like a rarity that sometimes it's my first record that's from 20 years ago. Like in some ways that album is like your old embarrassing yearbook pics because you're young and still finding your voice. But I am going to put it back on streaming at some point. But for now, it remains a rarity that you can buy at shows.
Right. It's like a collector's item.
But yeah, that was the first record I put out when I was still down south.
It's like a collector's item.
In a way, yeah, it is. Actually, not for nothing. Someone is selling it on Discogs right now, I think, for $50. So I'll sell you one for 10 if you want. But yeah, it's I got to get some of these out of the box down here.
It was more of an EP, though, right?
It's kind of.
It was more of an EP because it
was
about
9 songs
with the outro.
Yeah, 9 songs. Not either a long EP or a short album, So I guess it is more of an EP in a way.
Why the title Future Dead Rapper?
At that time, I've always had, especially as a younger man, I'm coming off my father's death. I'm rebelling against my environment. I'm just kind of very angry in a way. And I'm looking around at like the people that I'm amongst, and I just don't see any future in anything at that point. Like as a young man, especially at that time, like I had a very nihilistic point of view at times. Like I just, and I was making just a cynical joke of like, yeah, I'm a future dead rapper. Like, at best one day I'll be a rapper who's dead and it will be spoken of in the past tense. It was just a cynical commentary at the time of, and also thinking that I might not, live past 25, that, something would end up happening. In a way, it was just, I don't know, being young and full of vinegar.
So you don't think that it wasn't like you trying to mock like hip hop street culture or anything like that?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
No, I was making a nihilistic like comment about I didn't think I had a future. Like, I'm from Johnson City, Tennessee. Do you really think I'm going to make it in hip hop? Like, at best, I'll be spoken of in the past tense.
Can we go back a little bit and talk about the situation with your dad?
The long and the short of it is when I was a senior in high school, my dad was being treated for bronchitis and felt like something was off because he was having like vertigo problems and weird things with his balance. And he ends up getting a second opinion, finds out he has 2 brain aneurysms. aneurysms. He has a major invasive brain surgery. They repaired both of the aneurysms. He was supposed to be out of work for 6 months. He was out for 6 weeks because he was just a G. So he goes back to work and everything was fine for a little while. As time goes on, he starts having nerve issues, like his arm would stop working or his leg would stop working, or, he would just experience like temporary paralysis in different parts of his body. And it eventually kind of robbed him of his, my dad was like, by day he worked as a mechanical engineer. Like at night he built houses, you know what I mean? Like for a project. Like my work ethic very much comes from my father. My father was always on the hustle with something. Like if he wasn't getting work done to make a bag for his family, like he was, working on some kind of project. Like he built things. He built guns in his spare time. Like literally, like he would mill the metal and cut the wood and polish it. Like he was just a man's man that was always working on something. And then his body starts getting robbed of its physical ability. What we didn't find out until after he died was that it seems he had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. But one day I was at my job at Sears. I had just burned a L on my lunch break listening to 3-6 Mafia, and I walked back into Sears, and they're like, "Jake, you have a phone call." It's my grandmother telling me that I need to come home, and, my father had shot himself with a 9mm. When I got the phone call, I knew what had happened. Like I just knew, and I just knew. Like I knew when they call me and just tell me to come home, I knew what it was. On my first album, on Future Dead Rapper, I have a line where I'm talking about, I hope, my pops can get through what he's going through. And so that's what it was. Like he was being robbed of his, his physical ability and his dignity. And he just decided to end it on his own terms. Now, the funny thing is when I got that call, before I drove home, I went back to my crib and I burned another L. And I was listening to, I had 50 Cent Guess Who's Back CD at the time, and I put my headphones on, and randomly the song I listened to was Ghetto Quran. Now, to this day, like I just completely told you the story of my father's suicide. Like I can keep that together perfectly. Like I've made peace with it. It is what it is. It's part of my story. If I hear the first like 2 bars of Ghetto Quran, I will lose it. Like, but it is what it is. Like it was a horrible tragedy. My father was a great father. He was a great man. He taught me things that prepared me to, survive in this, crazy world. But my anger towards him not getting his full shake in life and getting to grow old and be a grandfather and like do all the things he wanted to do was a huge factor in me, sticking out this journey this whole time. It's like, I developed, going back to my obsessive personality, I go back to, like, I have this obsession with getting vengeance on life. Like, and what I mean by that is like every time I accomplish a goal or make a dream happen or make something dope happen for myself or check something else off the bucket list, every time I do that, it's like I'm just punching life back in the face for what they did to my father. So like, especially after he passed away, I was like, I just became diabolically obsessed with, I'm going to design the world that I want to live in, and I'm going to make it happen by any means necessary. So that's what it is.
Well, rest in peace to your dad, man.
Thank you.
It's crazy what you were saying about how you can't listen to that song Ghetto Quran, right, without breaking down, because music, I feel like, is almost as strong as our sense of smell. You know how like they say that the sense of smell will bring back memories that like you just don't even it's out of nowhere, right? But like when there's something about like when you hear a certain song that puts you in this kind of trance almost like state of nostalgic, it's just like it puts you back to that moment of like when you first heard it or like memories associated with it. So I totally feel you on what you're saying, because now that song is almost like it's ruined for you. Like you can't ever really listen to it anymore, you know? Like
And I love that song too, actually.
yeah, I know it's an amazing song, but I totally get what you're saying.
But yeah, no, you're right. Like, I mean, that's the power of music. That's why we do this. Like, we make music that will hopefully one day be somehow permanently attached to people's lives. So, but yeah, man.
So you've been on record to say that you add a lot of humor to your music, right? Do you think that can or has it been used against you as being kind of like a novelty rapper like Eminem was early on, or like a Lil Dicky? Like, have you faced that kind of backlash?
Occasionally, I think I have, in two kind of ways. One, like, for example, I would say if you were to ask people, you know, the song that they know me for as a solo MC, they would probably say $50 Haircut.
Right.
And that's like when I do live shows, that's the song that gets the biggest response. But the irony is that like that song got no support from like the DJs that regularly play my music. And, you know, a lot of because their response was almost like, oh, well, is this a comedy record? It's over a trap beat? And so the other aspect is that like right before the pandemic, I'm talking literally like 10 days before COVID shut down the world, I had a meeting with a booking agency that I was getting ready to sign with. The agency ended up going under after COVID anyway. But when I'm in they had an office that was based out of NYU student professional building. And I go to this meeting and like they clearly very much like my music and, you know, knew the right records and all that. But then they referred to me, the guy in the meeting said something. He's like, it's like meme rap, but gritty. And I just kind of thought to myself, I'm like, I do not want to be described as meme rap under any circumstances. Like, I very much, you know, consider myself and try very hard to be a serious MC. Like, I do have a very weird sense of humor. I have, you know, a lot of oddball references to different things. But at the end of the day, like, I'm trying to, even in a song like $50 Haircut, that I don't think it's a comedy record, but even if you were making the argument it was a comedy record, bar for bar, like there's so much technicality in there and double entendres and, you know, syllable rhymes and, you know, things, you know, that an MC should have in their toolbox. So I think in some ways, maybe it has worked against me. Just in people never know where to categorize me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because, you know, my music is too gully and gritty in some ways to put it with the meme rap and the, you know, a lot of, you know, stuff that's more on that end of the fence. You know, but then, you know, you're probably, I don't know. It's funny because I'm generally filed under boom bap. But what I do is not necessarily traditional boom bap. It's rooted in traditional boom bap. But I have a lot of other influences too that kind of shape the color of you know what ends up coming out. So I don't know, man. I think for people that need to be able to categorize things like, oh, well, this person's a meme rapper or they're a street rapper or they're you know, they're a lyrical rapper or a conscious rapper. I think for people who need to be able to categorize things, I present a problem because, it's somebody said one time, there was like, it's too street. What was it? They said it's too abstract for the street. It's too street for the hipsters, or something to that effect. That like it's hard to kind of categorize it. So I don't know. In some ways, maybe it's worked against me, but I think for the people that I truly connected with, I think it makes them appreciate it a little bit more, because that's one of the main things that I do get. Like when I hear stuff from people, they're like, you just do something different. Like you don't, I'm the sum of my influences. Like I'm as influenced by Redman as I am by Kool Keith, as I am by Jadakiss. Like, and things like that. So it's like I take the little kind of humor from Redman. I take the weirdness and the abstractness from the Kool Keiths. I take the lyrical precision from people like Jadakiss. I get a lot of, I think the anger in my voice was maybe influenced by Sticky Fingers from Onyx. He was one of my favorites when I first got into hip hop.
Right.
And, that's one of the things I love about somebody like Ghostface Killer is that, Ghostface is going to say whatever he's going to say, and whether you get it or not does not matter. Like, this is my art, interpret it how you like. And,
Right.
So yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't, but.
And for you guys that haven't seen the video, watch where he reads the comments under the $50 haircut video, because they're so funny. Some of the stuff that people say is ridiculous. And your reaction to it is even more funny, because people are like, I wouldn't pay more than $10 for a haircut. You're like, oh yeah, well, when I see you, I'll be able to tell that it's only $10.
One of the unfortunate, this is one of the unfortunate downsides of growth, is that like when I, for the first several years that I was making music, the only people that had ever even heard of me was like this small like-minded community of people who were all intelligent and cool and got the jokes. But like as your music gets out there, you start making the radar of people who may not get it. So one of the downsides of when $50 haircut started growing legs was I got all these people in the comment section, some of whom I was just confused how they ended up in my music video comments to begin with, because when I look at their profile picture on YouTube, they've got like the Trump flag in the background and the big Oakley sunglasses and, the America bandana. And I'm like, how did you end up in a Jake Palumbo comment section? But regardless, yeah, like I have always attracted a lot of trolls. And from the time I got on social media, like I have always attracted, for some reason, I am a magnet for trolls. And I think it's because, I don't know. I think some people are like offended by my audacity to just go out there and be myself, whether people get it or not. And so what I've always done is, I just kind of like put them on Front Street, basically, is anytime I get troll comments like that, I will generate, whether it's making a video like that of reading mean comments, or whether it's taking a screenshot with some kind of snarky reply, like I make replying to these people a sport and use it for the entertainment of my audience. So anybody who has followed Jake Palumbo for any length of time, you're never going to go longer than a month or two before you see me putting some troll on Front Street. And, it's funny, sometimes I can get to, people ask me like, are you making these up? And, that kind of stuff gets some of the best engagement on social media, but not everybody plays along. Like not everybody always takes the bait. Like sometimes I think, anybody can just reply F you and screenshot it. But like, I try to bait these people into a conversation so that I can humiliate them a little bit further. And not everybody always takes the bait and gives me something that I can work with. So that's why, it's usually only every couple months I can post one. But yeah, I do feed the trolls, and it's part of my, it's part of the entertainment when you follow me.
You describe yourself as a Tennessee-born hillbilly, right? So do you get like the term culture vulture a lot because of being a white rapper in a black culture, basically?
Outside of one guy at one show in Washington, D.C. one time who said, okay, Eminem. No, I really haven't. I mean, maybe in 10 years.
Wow, so you don't get compared to Eminem a lot?
Not really. Not to the point I've ever found it problematic or something I need to speak on. I mean, I can't say nobody's ever said that, but it's not like an obstacle I've had to. Now, I am from that school of white rappers who started rapping before Eminem, blew up nationwide. Like, I was influenced to rhyme by Public Enemy and the Wu-Tang Clan. So a lot of us as young men, everybody thought you started rhyming because of Eminem, and, we used to be, annoyed by that back in the day. But I've never had any kind of real comparisons about that. And I've never had any, I really have just never had any kind of issues navigating as a hillbilly in hip hop. And I think the reasons for that is because, I've always tried to wipe my feet at the door and not put my feet up on the coffee table and acknowledge the fact that, like, yes, I am a guest in the house of hip hop. Like, even beyond, racial and ethnic demographics. Like, I'm from Tennessee. Like, I was not born in the place where they had breakdancing and graffiti and, DJs spinning park jams. Like, I geographically am an outsider of the culture. But because I have always conducted myself as a person who acknowledges that, like, yes, like, this is an art form that, was not founded by people that look like me. I'm a guest here, and I've never had a problem with that fact. Like, I think that's a very easy thing to understand and digest and move on. I don't understand why so many white rappers often struggle with that. I have a song on a plant-based libtard. There's a song called Exit Stage Left. And the ending of the song, I say, sipping hot brew in a thermos, I have never been slighted for the hue of my dermis. I just try to make a valid contribution, do my best. Knickerbocker Times Square, I'm a 5-star guest. Now, like, I'm a guest in the house of hip hop. That is what it is. And now here's the thing, is that I feel like I've been made to feel like the most welcome guest possible. Like, I feel like hip hop kind of collectively, in the way that I've been treated as a participant in it, I feel like I've been told, here's your comfortable guest room. There's clean linens on the bed. There's food in the fridge if you're hungry. Because no one has, I've been treated with respect and kindness and allowed to do my thing and ply my trade with no issues. And, in the times that we live in such especially, with everything that's happened in the last few years, like when things like George Floyd happened and Breonna Taylor and things like that, like, I make it a point to speak up because a lot of folks don't necessarily know where the white people in their lives stand on these issues. So if you don't say how you stand on them vocally out loud, like, you know what I mean? So, like, I've just always conducted myself that way. And I've had the problems that I've had in hip hop have been related to being indie and not having enough money to fund my projects, being Southern, being weird, making left field music. Like, it's never been because of what I looked like. And, that's just how I've always, I was taught as a young child by my parents. My parents taught an anti-racist message in our household from the time we were very small. Before I was into hip hop, the punk rock I was listening to had a very similar message. And I studied hip hop in great detail before I ever tried to participate in it, to try to understand, okay, this is what's going to be expected of you. This is the way, this is what you need to show respect and, acknowledgement to. And I really don't have any stories to tell you about like struggling as a white MC. Like, anybody that doesn't like my music, I think it's just because they don't like my music. Like, it's too left of center for them, or they don't get it, or, whatever it is. But funny, even that guy in Washington, D.C., after the show, he was like, "Hey, bro, that shit was hard, man." The guy that called me Eminem.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, I just think that it's a very easy thing to acknowledge as a white MC, that this is what you need to be aware of. This is what you need to show acknowledgement and respect towards. And this is how you need to conduct yourself. And if you do those things, and if you speak up in times of trouble and remind people what side of the fence that you're on, you shouldn't have any problems. Hip hop is very welcoming.
Let me ask you this, Jake. Are you media trained, or were you like trained on how to do interviews? Because every single time I'm about to ask you a question, you start answering it already before I even get the question out. Like, you knew I was going to bring up the Lord Jamar guest thing before I was even going to ask you it or something. Like, I don't know. Like, it's pretty crazy.
I mean, you know what it is? It's really funny. Some people know me for I make a lot of instructional videos on Instagram and things like that, trying to help teach independent artists how to navigate the business and, how to make this happen for yourself, kind of the similar way that I did. And I did a video on that about a while back about media training. Now, I don't have any formal media training, but I think it's important that artists have some. The reason being is that, like, when people talk about media training, there's kind of a misconception that it means like you're given some kind of canned answer, like a political answer or something like that. But all media training really is just knowing what to do when there's a camera in front of your face or a microphone. When I first started doing interviews, what I didn't know was that some journalists and, bloggers and radio DJs and TV show hosts, some people are very prepared. Like, they take time to learn things about you. They take time to study your history. And then sometimes they don't. Like, you're just a guest that's booked on their show that day. And they're not even the ones who are booking the talent on their show that day. Some producer or somebody else booked you. So what I learned the hard way is that when you're in the presence of somebody getting ready to do an interview, you may find yourself in a position where they're just like, "Okay, explain, tell us about yourself." And in those moments, you need to learn how to concisely give the who, what, when, where, and why about what you're about. It's almost like having to interview yourself in a way. Now, I'm not talking about journalists like yourself and other people that, take time to, study on the people they're talking to beforehand. But sometimes you'll find yourself in a position where the person interviewing you may not know much about you. So you need to know what are like the key points you need to hit on just in case they don't ask you that. When somebody's asking you real compelling questions that they thought about and stuff like that, it's easier to just let the conversation flow naturally. But sometimes you may be in a position where you kind of got to just interview yourself. So now I don't have any formal media training, just a lot of trial and error. And not wanting to, I hate watching an interview and feeling like I rambled or, I didn't concisely get across what I was trying to say.
Do you know who Necro is?
Yeah, like Necro's music.
Right. Okay. So you're familiar with him. His brother is Ill Bill from Nonfiction and everything. He's from Brooklyn.
Yeah, I like Nonfiction. I like a lot of that music.
Okay. So he said that he feels hip hop only makes room for like one major white rapper at a time or one major Latino rapper. And you can have a bunch of like black rappers that aren't as talented, but it's like accepted. What do you think about that?
I mean, I'd have to hear the quote to properly respond to it. But in terms of like on a mainstream level, maybe perhaps like if we're talking on a, stadium type artists, but I can only speak from my own experience. And, in my own experience, being somebody who does, hip hop that is a little left field to some people, or left of center at least, in the way that it's presented. Like as I said before, there's plenty of people that dislike me or don't like my music or anything like that. Like I just personally have not had the experience of having pushback, based upon what I look like. Like I said, and if that's Necro's experience, or if he experienced pushback because of that, you got to understand, like, he came in the game, I would say, in 97, 98, somewhere in the late 90s. I was still in Johnson City, a teenager at that point. So, my personal experience has been that, the people that did not like me for whatever reason didn't like me because I was outspoken, because I was opinionated, because I was Southern, because I was using a bunch of big words and they think that I thought I was smart or something like that. Like I just can't personally point to like instances of pushback that I've experienced being a white MC because, like I said, even it's a geographic thing too, as well as a cultural thing. From where I'm from, like I didn't have access to the block parties. Like I wasn't alive back then. I lived in a place where that stuff wasn't happening.
Right.
So my perspective is from that of an outsider. But, the thing is, the reason I've never taken offense to the whole guest thing is because, like, when I have a guest over, like, I treat these people better than the people that live here. You know what I mean? Like, when I'm a guest at somebody's house, like, they always, make some sort of concession, or you're supposed to at least. And so, like, I've just never had an issue plying my trade and being me, being as outspokenly myself as I want to be. Based on what I look, as far as like what the mainstream pushes and, who's, these are goals that I never had. Like from the beginning, like I never wanted to be like a stadium artist. Therefore I don't feel any resentment for having not made it to that point. I wanted to be one of those artists that had their dedicated fan base, the people that rock with them, and then have a long-term career of longevity out of that. Like from the beginning, I've always wanted this to be, a slow burn. I started doing this when I was right out of high school, and at the top of my 40s now, like it's still consistently going up. So saying that to say, like, I don't know. Like I've always acknowledged that, this culture was created by people that don't look like me. And because I've been allowed a peaceful space to participate in, I've just never had no problem acknowledging that. Now, and again, maybe if that was my experience, maybe if I did get pushback, maybe if I did get up in front of my, a room full of people and they were yelling, yeah, white boy, stuff like that, then maybe I would feel differently about it. I can only recap what my experience is. That's why I don't get into debating, the FBA versus Latinos thing because I wasn't there. Like I wasn't there. I wasn't alive. I think the only party that is benefiting from those two sides arguing is racists and white supremacists who I don't rock with to begin with. I think that, you know, even if Latinos came in a little bit later, like maybe if they weren't at the first Cool Herc block party, whenever they did start showing up, you're talking about a period of what, 3 to 4 months, if that. Like, you know, so I just feel like I've always found hip hop to be a welcoming place. I've always, you know, I've just not had it. The hurdles and the troubles and the setbacks and stuff like that, like, that I've experienced in this game haven't been because of what I look like. Sometimes it's because of what I sound like. Sometimes it's the Southern twang in my voice. And sometimes it's my outspoken opinions about the music business and, you know, things of that nature. But that's fine. Like I'm being judged on the content of who I am. So, you know, if somebody else had a different experience, that's their experience. I can only speak on my own.
Right. And when it comes to like the whole like FBA argument and everything, I understand like from their perspective because it's kind of like, you know, a lot of things get rewritten history wise, right? You know, and Black people have created a lot of genres of music. So there's a level of sensitivity and protection when it comes to hip hop. It's like, you know, like we don't want this to be like another situation of that. So it's like, just give us like our credit. You know, I don't think like they're disputing that along the way Latinos came in and contributed, or you know, from the business side, white people helped bring it to the world more so, right? Because hip hop is like the most influential culture, I would say, in the world because it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. But it wouldn't be as big if it wasn't as welcoming as it is to accept people of other cultures.
Well, exactly. And that's what I mean is that, like, you know, people have the right to lay claim to whatever they did foundationally. I would not dispute that for 1 second. And that's why I don't get involved in that argument because on so many levels, I was not there. And it's just not my argument. It's not my argument to get involved in. And I don't like, you know, fanning the flames of anything that promotes any kind of racial discord because I grew up in Tennessee. I grew up around racist rednecks who, you know, they didn't care if you were Black or Latino or if you were a goth kid, even. It could be other white people who was just different from them. Like, I grew up around like racist bully rednecks, and that's why I just never, you know, like I said, it's I don't like to see discord there because, you know, hip hop is a community that is you know, today after 50 years is a melting pot of all types of people. And like I said, sometimes I feel like I think the racists are sitting there laughing, like, haha, watch them argue. And I don't ever like them people feeling like they get a win. But
right. It's kind of like you guys played right into the plan, basically.
1000% right. I do not like seeing that happen. I think that's what I say. That's what I mean when I say the only party that's benefiting from this argument is white supremacists. And let's not see them benefit from anything.
So you're very musically inclined. You like other genres of music. You play instruments, right? Why did you choose specifically to become a rapper? Like, why not be in a rock band or another genre? What was it about hip hop that just was it?
You know, what do I like? I've always had a wide palette of tastes. Like, I've always listened to all types of different music, rock, jazz, you know, and eventually that did become hip hop as, you know, as we talked about earlier when I got into Public Enemy and Wu-Tang as a teenager. But, you know what it was? Like the music from a musical side, what drew me to hip hop was the absolute, complete, and total freedom musically. And what I mean by that is this: like when I was a kid, and a teenager, I played in a few different bands, with schoolmates and stuff like that, but you were always very limited to what you did. Like, we're a punk band or we're this kind of rock band. And like, I may feel that way on Tuesday, but I may not feel that way on Thursday. Whereas with hip hop, as long as the drums are hitting, you can rap over rock, you can rap over funk, you can rap over soul, you can rap over jazz, you can rap over Zydeco, you could rap over klezmer music, you could rap over accordions, there is no limit to what could be done musically as long as the beat is knocking. So from a music side, that's definitely what drew me to it, to where I could just literally make whatever I wanted to make that day. From the rhyming side, I just had too much. My brain goes too fast and has too many thoughts and too many strong opinions on different things. It was just inevitable.
So November 17th, 2008, you end up finding out your day job is closing down, right? What kind of job were you working at the time?
So at the time, I moved to Brooklyn. I got a job. I was working at it was a website, www.digicombos.com, and they sold high-end digital camera packages. I was a bookkeeper for the website. Like, orders would come in from the internet, and I would input them into QuickBooks and, track all the income and expenses. The skills that helped me later, like running an independent label and, having to do my own paperwork and taxes and stuff like that. So it was interesting because the office was entirely like Orthodox Hasidic Jewish folks. And they were mostly older folks. And then you've got me, the hillbilly in Rockaware, just plot in the middle of it. And so, it was a dope job. Like, it was actually the only day job that I've ever had that I didn't hate, because I was allowed to work independently. I could talk to girls on Gmail chat while I was on the clock. We got off at noon on Friday. It was an ill job. But so what basically happened was, after I moved to New York, I got an internship at a recording studio, because this is kind of the glue that holds the rest of my career together from November 2008 to the present, is that I become an engineer. Now, it had dawned on me shortly after I moved to New York that I needed to learn. I'd already been recording in my bedroom, and I'd put out, I had pressed up 4 albums and released them on Space Lab by that point. And so I kind of realized that if I was going to be competitive making music, my music had to sound sonically pleasing. Like, it had to sound good if it was going to compete with what was out there. So somewhere along the way, the idea popped into my head that, if I become an engineer, not only will my own music sound better, but that's a way that I could maybe make a living and keep myself plugged into the music industry as I'm trying to get Jake Palumbo off the ground. Like, at this point, I had still, from the time I was in Tennessee till I moved to New York, I was doing DIY touring. By this point, we did have social media and MySpace and Facebook, and things are starting to come around, and I'm working the internet and booking tours off MySpace and things like that. But I've got this pretty good little groove going where I've got a day job that I don't hate. And at nights and weekends, I'm an intern at Progressive Music Studios in Manhattan. And I just tried to be the best unpaid, assistant that I could possibly be. I tried to be as useful as humanly possible so that they would want to keep me around and teach me things. Because at this point, I knew what I was doing. I just needed to learn, the rest of the story, from people who were actually experienced doing it. So I interned at that studio for about a year and a half. And in the same week, all this happened. So I had just returned. I going back to I would hustle shows off MySpace and whatnot, I had gotten a show at Westchester University in Westchester, PA. I was on my way back from that show in Westchester University when I got the news that my day job was closing because of the 2008 recession. I don't know if it's depending on your age, you may remember that time clearly. If you're younger, you might not. But like the entire U.S. banking system almost collapsed at that point. And a lot of companies were starting to go under. And my company was one of them. So I got the notice that my job was closing at the end of the week. The following 48 hours, two different things happened. I got my first paid studio session. One of the engineers at the studio had quit, and they needed somebody to record a rapper named Wise, who I never saw again. And I got $40 to record Wise. The day after, I want to say, I sold 3 beats off Craigslist, actually. I was hustling beats off Craigslist at the time. And a rapper named Wally Dutch, who I also never saw again, bought... I think he bought 3 beats for like $400 or $500, something like that. So in the same 72 hours, I've just lost my job, and I just made my first dollars in the music industry, basically. And so what kind of happened was I ended up in a situation where I not just had an opportunity to make this a full-time thing, but I kind of had no other choice, because when I lost my job, I started looking for another one and I couldn't find one. And because I was getting out and networking in New York and going to shows and performing and, trying to get my name out there, it became easier to find rappers and people who rap and bring them to the studio and make money that way than it was to actually find another 9 to 5. And so from 2008 till today, I've completely survived off the sum of the parts. Like, the money, the work that I do as an engineer, selling beats as a producer, rapping, doing features, doing shows. I sometimes, teach workshops and, do guest speaking stuff, helping teach, people about the music biz. Like the sum of all those parts, I've out of necessity is the mother of invention. So I was in a position where I just kind of had to tread water and make it work until the next thing came along. But the next thing never came along. What came along was 16 years of building up what we have today. So I got hired on at that studio finally, but not so fast, because that was the last week of November. In December, the building that studio was in opted to not renew their lease. So I was out of that job too. I wandered into a place called Play Studios that was a 13-room facility in Manhattan. It's one of the many studios that's not there anymore now, but I was the manager. I managed to get a gig as the manager at Play Studios. I did that for about 2 years. When I write my book, I'll have a lot to say about that era. There was some wild stories and I saw some wild things. But basically, over that period of time, mind you, I'm still learning engineering too. Like I'm figuring all this out on the job. And people often ask me, like, well, how did you get so nice with Pro Tools? And how did you do this? And how did you do this? That was the difference in whether I ate food or not. Like, very literally. Like if this artist did not walk out of the studio feeling satisfied with, what they just worked on, then, they're not going to want to pay. And then, I'm walking out of here with nothing. So, it was a lot of baptism by fire, like learning the trade on the job, but also, but networking through that. So what ended up happening was I worked at Play Studios for about 2 years, and there was all kinds of problems. The former owner had a bad habit of spending my paycheck on cocaine.
Wow.
And, there was a lot of times, like I'm in the studio working with big artists and, I'm running the risk of getting my lights cut off because of things like that. So it was one of those things that like I just kept toughing it out because I knew that something was going to come around. So as fate would have it, in what was that, 2012, I ended up getting my own studio space in the building next door. I was in that studio for about 7 years until they sold the building, and my studio's been in Brooklyn now since 2017. But point being is that from 2012 to the present, I've just had my own studio space because it became a situation of I would rather just shoulder the responsibility of paying the rent and the bills and going through all the headaches so that I can run things the way that I want to run them. Because it seems like, I never get into arguments with myself really about how we should do things. So as I start doing that, where this ties back into the rapping and producing is that, if you go through the list of like all the notable artists that I've collaborated with, like either on songs together, rhyming, or, artists I've produced for and done beats for, in 85% of those cases, like I started out as their engineer, and what I always did was I really tried to apply patience to the situation. And what I mean is that I would never bum rush people with my music. Like I would do the exact opposite. Like I would just, as time goes on, word of mouth, artists know other artists. People start recommending me. You should go work with Jake. He's nice. He's fast. He's efficient. And I end up in the studio with a lot of people, with Sadat X, with the Beat Nuts, with, all types of people. And I just at first would focus on just doing my job and doing it well and doing it properly and doing it thorough, making sure their music sounded as good as I could possibly make it and that everything ran smoothly and they'd want to come back and work with me and just establish myself as like a dependable, cool dude. And then what I would find is that by the time you've established a rapport that does not come with an agenda and your hand out looking for something, it's such an easier sell. It's an easier conversation to be like, hey, could I play you some beats? Or, hey, I'm working on an album. Would you want to jump on one of these songs? Like those conversations happen. One example I use, because he's a friend, I was Tony Touch's engineer I started working with Tony on the Peacemaker 3 album. Now I work with Tony to this day. He was at the studio last week. But, I worked with Tony for probably a year before I even told him that I did music and rhymed and things like that. And, by that point, we'd already established a rapport. And, a week or two later, my song was on Toka Tuesdays on Shade 45. And I didn't have to ask him to do that. You know what I mean? And so that's what I mean. And that's, kind of advice to any artist that's on the come up is that, like, if you approach a situation with, like, how can I add value instead of what I can take for it? And it's stuff like that is how I feel like one of the ways I've been able to avoid the culture vulture conversation is because I approach my approach to hip hop with what can I contribute to the pot instead of what I can take from the pot. But point being, that's what I meant to say earlier. I couldn't find the words at the time. But point being is that, I spent those next few years like with my head down, just building my skills up, building my clientele up, and building up the network of artists that, wanted to work with me. And as time went on, that did become a much easier conversation, making records with these folks. I released a few albums in that process. I put out District Selectman in 2007. I put out Jobber to the Stars in 2011, Curtain Jerker in 2014. Jake It Till You Make It was kind of the turning point album for me where people finally started actually hearing, actually had some semblance of who I was. And I start getting radio play and, a little bit better looks on the internet and things like that. And so if you look at the guest list on that album, you've got Sean Price, rest in peace. You've got Rock Marciano, Smith & Wesson, Rusty Jukes, Shabam Sadiq, Elda Sensei. These are all people that like I was mixing their albums or recording them or doing something. You know what I mean? So yeah, I spent that period, basically just trying to add value to the pot so that people were more receptive to, actually wanting to hear what I do musically.
Right. In one of your interviews, you basically said that you try to wake up each morning and tell yourself that you're currently living your dream, right? And that you've been for 15, 16 years now, and you pay your bills entirely by doing music. And you say you approach things through like a gratitude kind of perspective, and you don't take things for granted. I think this is a testament that being an independent artist, you can make a decent amount of money if you do it right. That replaces a 9 to 5. You may not be super rich like the image that has been sold throughout the years of rappers on major labels, that are millionaires and living in mansions, but you're not poor, not necessarily doing bad either. So it's like, say you can make like 100K doing what you're doing, right? Or you could be working a 9 to 5, making 100K doing something that you don't like doing. I think that rappers like you that are making it in a lane like this, doing it independent, it's a great testament to success is subjective, right? Because people think if your name isn't the biggest on the radio or social media, that you're a failure as an artist, but that's not necessarily true.
Not at all. And that's what I've dedicated a lot of time and, the videos that I make for Instagram to try to basically clue people in on that is that, you can exist completely outside of the mainstream and even the popular underground, you can exist outside of that. If you just have that core dedicated group of people that rock with you, I tell people all the time, like, if you can sell 250 CDs of a release and 50 t-shirts and, this many sticker packs, like, that's a pretty nice bag. And, in my case, like it's the sum of the parts. Like, I might make more money 1 month doing features. And then say in August, I don't do any features, but I sold the beat that month or, obviously with the studio and the mixing and the mastering and stuff like that, that's a regular thing. But, having multiple irons in the fire, and also too, like, if people knew, like, there's a lot of artists, that are full-time popular artists who have other trades, like they direct videos or they are graphic designers or, they do other gigs in the music or they work at a record label or, they do other gigs in the music industry outside of their art. And so that's what I mean. So success is subjective. Like I wake up in the morning working for myself. I work with my hip hop heroes and I get to count them as friends and colleagues. I get more comments and messages and DMs than I can reply to in a day. I try my best, but I never get back to everybody. And it's consistent. I can't look back at any part of my career and say, well, last year was better than this year. So, it really is about just finding that comfortable niche of the people that do actually rock with you and just focus on them. Now, obviously, as time goes on, myself and others, like we're trying to grow that number. We're working hard to make that number larger. But for the best years of my life, I woke up in the morning and done what I want to do, essentially. Like I do have to do all kinds of things I don't want to do. Like that's part of being a small business owner.
But it's kind of like and, you do what you don't want to do in order to do what you want to do, right? Pretty much.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like you sacrifice on that end to have freedom elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, that's, to me, again, like I said, I keep trying to grow it each year. But it's so funny too, because like it's really funny because going back to the troll thing, and I'm a magnet for trolls, is that like as more people find out that I exist, because they've never heard of me, I get a lot of people in my comments that'll be like, give it up, you're never going to make it. And I'm sitting here like, you know, I live in a fairly nice apartment in Brooklyn in a, you know, clean, safe neighborhood. I paid the light bill with, you know, money from what I do musically. Like I've done this. I just don't know what part of making it hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean? Like obviously you always want to be more known and appreciated, but I'm just like, I kind of already made it, sir. But yeah, success is always in your own optics. It's your definition of like, as long as you're able to, you know, pay your bills and to be happy and fulfilled doing what you're doing, then that is success. But yeah, it's all in your own lens.
So you ended up working with the late Sean Price, like you were saying. What was that relationship like?
There's a story I'm saving for my book. I have told the story to Bernadette. I told the story to Rock Ness. I think I told the story to Rusty Jux back when Rusty Jux and I made an album in 2018 called Jake and the Jux Man. We did an album together, me on the beats and him on the mic. I've told this story to a few people and they've gotten great laughs out of it. But I once waited 6 years on a Sean Price verse. And there's a really funny story that, like I said, I'm going to save that one for the book. But to your point, Sean came. So what it basically boiled down to was where my old studio was in Manhattan. My studio was in the basement of that building, and there was a studio on the 8th floor. Shout out to my guy Dan the Man. Boot camp and a lot of the duck down music from that era was all done up at Dan's spot. And so in that building, you know, you run into different people in the elevator and things like that. And so I ended up meeting Sean in that building. And I didn't see him for a while because his daughter was born and he went on tour and things like that. But around 2015, yeah, it was probably early 2015. He started working on some music with my man Innocent. They released one music video. It's on the internet. It's Innocent, Rusty Jux, and Sean. It's called Silent Murder, and it's filmed at my old studio. I'm standing in the background somewhere with a Douce bottle. But anyway, Sean, I would say he was probably at the old Space Lab, maybe like 10 times, 11 times, somewhere in there. I never got to know him as well as I would have liked to, but, you know, he gave me the phone number to the crib and, you know, we did have some great conversations. One of my favorite memories of Sean Price was at my old studio in Manhattan. We had an A room and a B room. There was the big A room and then there was a smaller B room. Just a little control room and a vocal booth. And in between, there was a lobby. And, you know, people would burn L's and things of that nature in that lobby. And so I was in between sessions. And Sean was there on his iPad. You know, he was burning one. And there was a guy he was a friend of somebody else that was in the session. And this guy was drunk and was being loud and belligerent. And was going on about words, son, yo, Hot 97 don't play, yo, they not playing the real hip hop. They're, you know, that's not where hip hop lives. And, you know, he's just drunk yelling about it. And Sean's sitting there looking at his iPad. And the guy had been yelling for a couple minutes. And finally Sean looks up and he goes, hey, you know, they got these now. And he holds up his iPad. He goes, you can listen to whatever you want. You ain't got to wait on Hot 97. He just goes back to, you know, smoking and looking at his cartoon. But Sean Price was my favorite rapper of the modern era. And, you know, from the time I was a little bit late, I didn't really get up on the genius of Sean as a solo artist until Jesus Christ Superstar. So I forgot, I guess that was probably like 2006. Because I was still living in Tennessee when Monkey Bars came out. And there was, because of record distribution the way it was at the time, there was just certain albums you couldn't always get down there. But by the time Jesus Christ Superstar came around, Sean quickly became my favorite rapper because I loved any music that was gritty and aggressive, but was also smart and funny. And Sean was all of those things. And that's one of those things too, in my dealings with Sean. He's hilarious. Like, he would have the entire room cracking up. And what I learned really quick is, like, he did not want to talk about the music business. Like, he would just, if somebody like tried to discuss the industry or something like that, he would just shut that conversation down and just not acknowledge you were talking to him. He wanted to talk about like comic books or whatever, Marvel flick he just saw or, stuff like that. But very cool. I was honored to get to, have a song with him. The last song on Jake Until You Make It album is Dikembe Palumbo featuring Sean Price. And, some of the music he recorded with Innocent, I think may still see the light of day. I don't know. I have nothing to do with how anything comes out, but,
I interviewed Illa G, and Illa G was saying like Sean Price was like a special one because he didn't like a lot of people. So if he rocked with you, it meant a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it meant a lot to me personally. But just an amazing presence, just a titan of a presence.
Do you remember where you were at when you found out that he had passed away?
I woke up that day. I had just gotten back. I want to say I had just gotten back from Philadelphia, and I slept in that day. Like, I didn't wake up till 12 or 1 or something like that. And I woke up to the news.
Man, that's unfortunate. He was something else.
Yes. He's highly missed.
Yeah. Well, rest in peace to Sean Price, man. So you also worked with one of my favorite MCs, Royce the 5'9", on the song Imperial Hubris, right? And that was on your album District Selectman.
Yes.
How did that song come about?
Royce was just always one of my favorite MCs. Specifically, his Death Is Certain album.
Oh man, I remember when that joint came out. I had to get it the day of. That album was ridiculous.
I played that out because you got to understand too, like at the time Death Is Certain came out, that's when I'm in Tennessee. I've just experienced a tragedy with my pops. I quit my job at Sears. Life is just hectic and insane for me. And that Death Is Certain album was like the album at the time that, I don't know, I just felt like it was a soundtrack. It was the only album that matched like what I felt like at that time. You know what I mean? So no, I loved that album. I just loved Royce, period. And so District Selectman, I started that album in Tennessee, but then moved to New York in the middle of it and then ended up finishing it in New York. And so the collab came about just because, District Selectman was my second project, but it was, in most people's eyes, that's my proper debut album. And so I'm like, and also too, at the time, I was dating this girl who worked for TuneCore back when TuneCore is a huge company now, but at this time, they were a startup that was like 6 people in a little office in Dumbo. And so through that connection, I had digital distribution. Like I was on iTunes and stuff as far back as 2007.
Wow.
So saying that to say, because District Selectman was going to be my first, like, quote unquote, nationwide release, I wanted a feature from somebody. And, you know, at the end of the day, if I'm going to pick somebody, you know, Royce was who I chose. And so, it was hooked up. I ended up speaking with his manager, Keno.
Keno, yeah, shout out to Keno.
Yeah, shout out to Keno. Keno was the one hooked it up. I remember there was no it was so funny. I actually found the other day, I found the actual paper of the Western Union that I sent to Royce.
Wow.
Reverse, because, you know, PayPal existed at that point, but like, you know, it's not common like today where you can just pull out your phone and cash app somebody. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I've still actually got the Western Union receipt from that. But yeah, that was that song with Royce was my first like collab, you know, with somebody that I looked up to. And so that was a big one for me, like in the early days. And you know what was so funny? It's funny in hindsight. At the time, it was I didn't have quite a sense of humor about it. After we did the song and the song came out and it got a little bit of burn on MySpace, I got an email from Royce and he was like, "Yo, I see, you know, the song's getting a little traction. If you want, I could forward it to Hip Hop DX for you." And I was like, "Yo, that'd be awesome," because I'd never been on Hip Hop DX at that point. And so I forward the song, and then I'm keeping my eyes peeled over the next couple of days. Finally, Hip Hop DX posts the song, and they list it as Jake 1 featuring Royce the 5'9".
Oh my God.
But Jake 1 is an ill producer, by the way.
Right,
I think he's very dope. Shout out to Jake 1.
And I know at that time he was having a big buzz with his name, so I can see how the confusion was happening.
Right. So I go and I was like, "Oh no!" But you know, I mean, these are just like these. I've got a million stories like that. Like these are the lumps that you have to take, you know, to eventually, you know, build something that lasts long term. But yeah, my only regret is that I wish that present day me got to rap with Royce.
Right.
Because I think it's come a long way since I made that song. But even then, like, I remember going in there and just trying to eat my Wheaties. I'm like, you know, at the time I gave my best effort because I'm like, Royce is just so ill.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, no, if you ever see this interview, Royce, I'd love to do another joint.
So at the time when you guys decided to do the song, like, did you talk to him on the phone beforehand, or like you just sent him the track? Like, how did the correspondence go?
We spoke. It was, you know, it was briefly, like most of the business and stuff. Like, you know, I dealt with Keno and all that. We spoke a little bit over email after the fact and all that, but I haven't spoke to Royce in a while.
Got you. Yeah, it's kind of crazy with Royce. He's kind of like done the, I don't know if you want to say like, it's kind of, I don't know, maybe not Benjamin Button, but it's like he's gotten better over time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's ridiculous, like how much better he's gotten over time.
No, 1,000%. Like, you know, to the present day, like even, you know, the brilliance of something like Tabernacle or something like that.
Right.
But that's the ill part about getting older as an MC is that, like, you know, if you keep doing your due diligence as you go, like you should be improving. And, you know, I think it takes a certain number of years of experience to be able to write so vividly like that.
Yeah, so, because a lot of times people will say like your best album is your first album because you've had your whole life to make it. But, you know, I think people forget about how sometimes with maturity and, you know, your perspective changes with life, and he's a testament to that, right? Because like he never really rapped about personal stuff on that level until later on in his career, where he came out with like the Book of Ryan, and it was like a really insight into his life, you know? So yeah. I think that's just amazing, man.
No, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. I saw that you were saying like, and I'm paraphrasing, but you learn to play your position and not bombard people with what you do or ask for favors from the jump. And it's actually helped you in the long run because you are crafting this relationship and not having an expectation because this person is so and so that you should be like, yo, hey, I know I'm engineering your session, but I can actually rap and get on my record too, and kind of thing. And it's kind of like the situation with Tony Touch, right? Like that actually ended up helping you in the long run.
1,000%. Like, and that's what I mean is that I think most people don't want to feel like random strangers are trying to get something from them. So I think if you approach situations with trying to give first, then, and also too, like, as I said earlier, like almost everybody I work with, I meet other artists through them. Like through Tony Touch, I meet Psycho Les. Through, like everybody that I've worked with, through my relationship with the Beat Miners, who I work with a lot. I end up mixing a Nas record. I think it's so important that people need to know that, like, you're not just out there trying to be a leech, that, like, you're here for the right reasons and you want to contribute rather than just take. And I think when you do those things and you do them from a genuine place, like, I think you'll generally find that people want to help you in a lot of cases whenever they can. Not everybody can help you with everything every time, but I think it's a lot easier to get things done when you approach things that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said that you got to work with Psycho Les. Shout out to Psycho Les, man. That's a good brother.
Oh man, shout out to Psycho Les. That's my guy. I mixed most recently. I mixed his album would be Real Psycho.
That's right. I saw you post about that.
Yeah, I mixed Real Psycho. I started working with Les. So again, going back to you meet people through people. I started working with Tony Touch when he was a little over halfway through the Peacemaker 3 album, and Beat Nuts. There's several Beat Nuts beats on that album. They did maybe about a third of the production on that album. And so I ended up getting Psycho Les referred via Tony. And so the first song I ever mixed for Psycho Les actually oddly featured Be Real. The song was called Fuck 'Em If They Listenin'. And so that went well. And then I ended up getting tapped to when he put out Dank God, he did a solo compilation album called Dank God that was a bunch of different people over Les's beats. I mixed about half of that album and mastered all of it. And we just kept in touch, and worked together here and there since then on different things. But when I found out he was doing a whole album with Be Real, I was like, that's just a great idea. I just think it's a dope combination. And so, Les has been living in Cali for a couple years now.
Right. And he's on the podcast with Be Real too.
Yeah, I was gonna say he do the Dr. Green Thumb podcast with Be Real. And so even with him being in Cali, he actually flew to New York to be in the studio with me when we mixed it. We did all the mixes was done in person. And so it's just, I'll tell you the one thing about Les, he's very laid back. He's very easy to work with. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very easy for us to get into a groove. We tend to knock out mixes fairly quickly. We usually get stuff knocked out in a couple hours. We don't usually spin our tires too long on a song. But nah, that's my guy, man. That's definitely one of the highlights of people I work with. So go check out that Real Psycho if you haven't yet.
Wait, did you work with the Beat Nuts as a whole, like with Juju too, or is just Psycho?
No, Juju came by the old studio a few times, like around, when they were working with Tony on that record, Juju came through a few times. There was one time I was actually in the vocal booth laying a verse, and I had just messed up. Like, I had just flubbed a line like 8 bars in. And I look up, and Juju's standing in the control room. And I was like, oh, no, Juju just saw me fuck up. But I worked with Les a lot more. But no, I would love to, if they end up doing another Beatnuts record, I'd definitely love to be involved with that one. I love the Beatnuts.
Yeah, man. This classic, they just they don't get the credit that they deserve. And
no, definitely. Like, some of the most unique producers, that ever were, like, and still doing it. Like, and that's the thing. That's another thing that, I connect with Les on, is like, Les is a dude that, and the Beat Miners are the same way. Like, a lot of my production heroes that I've gotten to be friends and colleagues with, the running theme with all of them is like, they're still out digging for records. Like, they're still out, like, trying to find new sounds and studying different techniques and trying to learn something that they didn't learn before. And, it's, that's dope. Like, it's just as good of a compass as any.
Yeah. And shout out to my guy, Mighty VIC too.
Oh yeah. Shout out to VIC. That's my dude too. I've never worked with VIC directly, but Vic has referred me a bunch of clients over the years, and I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, man. That's my dude.
Yeah. A real ill producer in his own right, too.
Yeah.
Vic is so dope, man, from Boomerang and Missing Links, and he's definitely got some heat.
You've been in the industry for so long, and I know you've got like tons of stories, but what other stories can you tell us, like, from other artists that you've worked with? That's
a hard on the spot question. And that's part of why I'm actually writing a book at the moment. Mm-hmm. Is I'm not that far into it, but while I can still remember all these stories clearly, like, I'm trying to, write things down. I mean, I've seen, especially during the time that I worked at Play Studios, I saw everything from, a major label exec stripped naked and robbed at gunpoint in front of the elevator.
What?
I'm not going to name names on the internet, but, I have seen a lot of crazy stuff. That's why I'm writing a book. I mean, if you ask about somebody specifically, I could, but you know what? It's definitely the one thing that, doing this full time for so long, I'm not surprised by anything out of anybody anymore. Like, I've seen, people do really weird and funny things in pursuit of, whether it's actual monetary currency or whether it's social currency or clout, as the kids say.
Right.
No, I've definitely that's on the spot. That's a tough question. I
do a lot of content that's related to like G Unit or Terror Squad. Like, you have any stories about them?
I've never worked really with anybody from either of those camps. I opened a few shows for Young Buck when I still lived in the South, but I mean, that's just getting booked on the same show. You know what I mean? As an opening act. But G Unit and Terror Squad, I really never worked with anybody associated with that camp.
But when you performed on the same bill as Young Buck, did you get to interact with him though?
Somewhat, but it's just the backstage show conversation. What up? Yo, good to meet you. Yo, we gonna rock it tonight. Like, I have found it to that point too. Like, I found just throughout touring and stuff like that and being in different places, like, everybody has their own process of getting in the zone before the show and things like that. And like, that's not always the time to network.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because, everybody, it's A, you're there to do a job, and B, like, even me personally, I have like this kind of thing in the 10 minutes before a show and the 5 minutes before a show and then the 2 minutes before a show. Like, I go through this kind of like mental roller coaster. So, but nah, G Unit and Terror Squad, I mean, a fan of both crews, but I haven't actually worked with anybody from that camp.
You said that you mixed the Nas record, right? Was that for Stillmatic, or what album was that for?
No, that was on a movie soundtrack. That was the song was called The Mecca on 40-Year-Old Version soundtrack.
Oh, okay.
Nas and Ghostface Killer and Styles P. And I guess maybe I have Remy Ma is on that record. I didn't meet Remy. Her verse was sent in via Pro Tools.
But were you there when Nas recorded his verse?
Nas recorded his verse in Cali. And
got you. Okay.
So that song was produced by the Beat Miners. Mm-hmm. And so again, this all goes back to relationships, is that the beat that Nas ends up picking for the movie soundtrack is produced by the Beat Miners. I have a relationship with the Beat Miners. So they say, hey, who do you want to mix this? And that's how I get looped in. Like, and the reason I'm saying these things is that it's like when they say that, like, you always hear it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Facts.
And that gets misinterpreted sometimes as one day you're going to meet this person who's just going to wave a wand and change everything for you. And that's not what that means. What it means is the more people that you have relationships with and a rapport with, and they can depend on you, the more likely opportunities are going to come your way. So yeah, like Nas may not even know who I am, but through these other relationships, we're able to. Now I did, I had good communication with the Mass Appeal team, and they were awesome, and all that stuff went great. But yeah, it's all about keeping your relationship, because that's how opportunities are going to come your way. But yeah, that song, the song's called The Mecca.
Have you ever was such a big fan of somebody, and then you met them in real life and they turned out to be, kind of disappointing because they weren't as cool as you thought they were? They were an asshole or something like that.
That's a complicated problem for me, because I've met a lot of people that I used to really enjoy their music. And when I dealt with them as people, it wasn't always quite the same. Like I was joking with somebody recently, but like, this is the truth. Like, say I'm on the go and I've got my headphones on and it's Spotify. I'll be listening to a playlist and some song will come on and I'll hear a rapper and I'll be like, man, he owes me $100, for some studio session from 5 years ago. And, then I got to skip that song because I don't want to hear this guy. And then, I'll get a couple more songs down and I'll be like, oh, well, this dude tried to get with my ex years ago and I don't want to listen to this dude. And I'll skip that song. And there was a time, when there are times I occasionally wish I could just go back to being a hip hop fan, in terms of, I have a very difficult time separating the art from the artist once I've had a bad experience with somebody as a person. It becomes difficult for me after that to enjoy their music quite the same. So like, there are times I wish like I could just go back to where I thought like, everybody was cool and everybody got along. And, but yeah, that sometimes occasionally there's a lot of songs I skip on Spotify sometimes because I'll hear a voice and be like, nope, not that guy. I remember that time we were on the same show and, he cut into 10 minutes of my stage time or something like that.
And you can't say any names?
I'm not trying to start drama on the internet about something minor that might have happened a decade ago.
Right. But I heard you say that before getting into the industry, you think that it's this like large thing, but then when you get into it, you realize it's fairly small, like 500 people, the same people and stuff.
Like the same 500 to 1,000 people.
Right.
Yes.
So then to add on to your Spotify comparison, you can only do a skip so many times unless you have premium, right? So your premium is like your clout.
Well, I do have premium.
You know what I mean? Your clout and like, your reputation and everything. But it's like you can only be a little petty about it so much because you still got to get work. You still got to work with people, right?
Well, right. And, you know, to be fair, like now on the flip side of that, there's people that I've met who have exceeded my expectations. And, you know, that's people like I mentioned them earlier, the beat miners, like Evil D and Mr. Walt. I work with them very regularly. But like they've really become big brothers to me. And, you know, I like them more as people than I do as producers. And they're some of my favorite producers. And like, you know, people like Craig G is another guy I consider a big brother that like is just, as much as I liked him as a rapper, like he's even cooler as a person. You know, people like Raz Kaz, El the Sensei of the Artifacts ends up becoming a big part of my career because we did the Solving Cases album together.
Right.
I mixed the Artifacts album with Buck Wild, No Expiration Date. You know, but L's like one of my closest best friends in this industry. Like, and so that's what I mean is that like, yeah, for every bad experience you have where it's like, yo, I rocked with somebody's music and then I dealt with them and, you know, I had a whack experience with them or whatever. For all of those, like, thankfully, you know, if not, this would be a miserable profession. But, you know, thankfully I get experiences that are the opposite of that. So where like, you know, as much as I liked their music, you know, I like them even more as people. And, you know, I've in recent years been able to have, you know, I didn't start out with any kind of mentorship, but in recent years, I've been able to get some mentorship from a lot of just ill veterans. So that makes all the, you know, the bullshit worth it.
Would you agree that, you know, how people say like, it's nothing what it seems? There's a lot of smoke and mirrors for the industry. It's a lot of fakeness.
You know what it is? I mean, maybe not in the Illuminati way that a lot of people think it is. You know, like I've never seen anybody have a ritual or, you know, stuff like that or nothing like that. But you know what it is that I just think that like a dream is perfect until you actually get to touch it. And then once you get to touch it, you see that like, yeah, it's still your dream, but there's flaws here. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is that like, you know, for everything that goes well, like 3 things can go wrong. And you end up having to just kind of focus on the things that did go well. So I wouldn't say that like it's not like it seems. The industry, when you stop thinking of the music industry as this like mystical place where like some governing body waves magic wands and decides who does what, and you start looking at it like it's just a series of transactions between individual entities, then it's just like, well, how many good transactions within individual entities can I make in my own favor? Like, it's definitely not like I thought it was. Like, there's all kinds of, you know, I really thought that, you know, talent and quality of music played a larger role in what goes on. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's all kinds of brilliant, amazing records that record labels have lost money on because they didn't sell. Whereas this, you know, this record that's not artistically brilliant, you know, goes through the roof. So I've just always tried to keep my visions and my goals realistic so that I never felt disappointed. You know, that's what I mean. Like, I never cared about being on the Grammys. So the fact that I'm not nominated for a Grammy this year, although the Beat Miners De La Soul Pharoah Monch record I mixed was Grammy considered this year, or last year. But saying that to say that, like, you know, those benchmarks of success were never necessarily on my radar. So I don't feel disappointed. having not reached them. I wanted to have my own operation that grew a little bit over time, and to be able to still keep doing this as I get older. So as long as that maintains, then I'm happy, as long as we're still growing. And that's the other thing about going back to the culture vulture thing. You get a lot of artists. Now, in that case, I will name names. Like, it's the Kid Rocks and the Post Malones and like the people that use hip hop for the coolness factor to get whatever buzz and clout that they can, garner from it, and then abandon hip hop. Like, I frequently, I joke a lot, but I'm very serious when I say that, like, I would still like to be rapping and making beats when I'm 60. Like, I don't plan on abandoning hip hop at any given time. So,
that's a good point that you bring up, because this does get brought up a lot, right? Like, people get upset about white artists that come in through hip hop and then they abandon for a different genre.
Right.
Kid Rock did that with country rock kind of, Post Malone, MGK went into do like a punk band and stuff, like, so that's where like that whole, it adds more to the cultural appropriation, or I don't know, culture vulture narrative.
Oh, that's what I mean, is that it's using hip hop for the coolness factor and then basically abandoning it. So, again, I like rock music and I like jazz music and I like all that other stuff, but I plan to be 60 years old with platinum dentures and, still rocking polo, and hopefully making some beats and kicking some bars. I think that's another thing too, is that, a lot of people just come in, use hip hop for whatever they can use it for, and then leave. Like, I'm here because I want to be here. And I try to kind of wear it on my sleeve that, like, hey, I'm really happy to be here and I want to be here. So I think that's another reason that, like, I've just not had those type of issues.
Yeah, I definitely think that you haven't really witnessed that type of stuff, because you come across as a very like humble guy, and that you're lucky to be here. You're grateful to be here, that who made it possible for you to be here, who created it. You know what I'm saying? Like you said, you come in and you wipe your feet at the door. So it's all about the respect, right? Hip hop is not just about, because it's provided so many different people the opportunity to be able to feed their families, all these different things, right? It's a blessing for so many people, and hip hop is not just about what you get from it, it's what you give back. And I feel like you're the type of person that is always paying homage to people and paying respect. So that's why I'm sure, you haven't had that experience.
Thanks, man. I try. Like, that's what I try to do. I always say too, like, I look at this like I get to do this, not like I have to do this. I mean, I have to because it's in me and it's who I am, but like I get to do this. And the other thing is, like, I start all my expectations at zero. There are over 100,000 songs per day uploaded to streaming services. We're in such a muck of information feed at any given time that, there's, and out of those 100,000 songs per day, there's something like, I don't know the exact statistics, I'd have to look it up, but there are millions upon millions of songs on streaming services that have 0 plays.
Wow.
So no one has to listen to my music at all. So by starting my expectations at 0, there's nowhere to go but up. It's like every stream, every comment, every fire emoji, everything is, I'm just like, all right, you know what I mean? So I just focus on trying to find more of those people instead of being angry about why those numbers aren't larger.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, gratitude over attitude always.
All right, Jake, I just want to thank you for your time, man. Is there anything else that you want to say to the people before we go ahead and wrap it up?
Appreciate you having me. I'm Jake Palumbo. I've been around for a while. If you're not familiar with the catalog. There's a lot of music available, both my solo albums as an MC, but I also have a lot of other albums as a producer where it's a duo of me on the beats and someone else on the mic, whether it's me and Elvis Sensei, me and Rusty Jooks, me and Q Unique. There's a lot of those type of projects too. So, you know, if you're just getting acclimated, there's a lot of stuff there to keep you busy. Follow me on Instagram. I do a lot of videos and stuff to try to help out artists navigate, you know, the craziness of the independent music game. Cause, you know, I'm just like you. I started out with no resources and no money and nothing like that. So www.jakepalumbo.com. I'm on all social media, Jake Palumbo. I've got a lot of music out at the moment. I got a lot of music coming, but just stay tuned. Like, we're always keeping it active.
Appreciate you, Jake.
My man, I appreciate you having me, bro.